Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And today I am joined by singer-songwriter Jenny Sturgeon. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, it's nice to be here, or across the airwaves.
Yes, it is. It's nice to speak to you, definitely. And we're going to be talking about The Living Mountain, which is your new album. And for those listening, if the name The Living Mountain doesn't mean anything, then you're in for a treat because you're going to learn some really interesting things. So The Living Mountain is the name of the album. Can you tell us a bit about the thinking behind it?
Yeah, so The Living Mountain borrows its name from the book that inspired it, which is called The Living Mountain, written by Nan Shepherd. And she lived her whole life just outside Aberdeen, in Aberdeenshire, and not very far from where I was brought up. And I was familiar with her name, but hadn't actually read her book until about 6 years ago. And was kind of fell in love with it, I think, because it was describing a lot of the things I was familiar with, the landscapes around the Cairngorms, which is where I spent quite a lot of time as a kid, and it's a really important place to me, and it just meant a lot reading her book. And then I was happened to be looking for another project to work on and picked up the book again and thought, this could work really well.
Well, it is an incredible book, and we'll talk more about it later. But what drew you to it in the first place? Because not that many people know about it still, I think. Probably better knowing up where you are around the Cairngorms than it is elsewhere in Scotland.
Yeah, it's surprising. It's kind of taken a long time for it to get into people's psyche, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why that is, but it's a lovely book. It's a short book, and the thing I really like about it is you can dip into it at any point, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever read it cover to cover as it's written. I've always dipped in, to chapter 2 or to chapter 9. I've read each chapter multiple times, but not necessarily in the order that they are written. And it just kind of in my mind, it lended itself well to this song project, partly because of the familiarity with the area, but her language and her use of expressive language is so beautiful, and each chapter is almost like poetry in itself. So yeah, just kind of felt like the right thing to do.
I think it does almost read like a prose poem at times, the way that we'll get into the themes in a moment, but the way that she writes it, as you say, is quite short, only a few chapters long. It was, if I think I'm right in saying, it was written in the 40s, is that right?
Yeah, I
And
think, yeah, I believe so, yeah.
yeah, but really, I first came across it when I was studying Scottish literature in the 2000s, I think. And there was a big push to kind of say Muriel Spark wasn't the only woman writer of the kind of earlier part of the 20th century. And people will know Nan Shepherd, even if they think they don't, because she is currently on the £5 note, isn't she?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So in recent years, she has kind of gone into kind of consciousness, and there's been a lot of talk about her. So how did the book feed into the music? How did you think that the themes in the book were going to feed into your music?
Well, the thing that first struck me was that there's 12 chapters in the book, and each one, they range from sort of 3 pages to 10 pages. They're not very long, each chapter, but she covers basically all the elements of the mountain. So there's the plateau, there's the group, there's the birds and the animals and the insects, there's man and human relationships with the island, with the mountain. It's kind of like an island in a way. And then other elements like sleeping on the mountain, and being, just the general sense of being there. And so she'd kind of put them into, like, broken up this big overall idea of the mountain into these smaller bite-sized chunks, which to me kind of jumped out as being perfect songs. So the way I went about it was made a note of all the different chapters of the book and their names, and I was quite conscious that I didn't want to directly lift any of her words because they're her words, and I wanted to sort of say my own thing as inspired by her, but not plagiarizing her, if you like. And so I wrote down all these chapter titles, and then, first of all, having previously read the book quite a number of years ago, the first thing I did was I just free wrote for each chapter. So, for example, plants, I just started a new notebook and wrote until I kind of ran out of things to say about the topic of plants, and that in relation to the mountains and the Cairngorms, and the high peaks and the forests below. So that was me kind of getting out all of the ideas that I had myself, and then I went back and read the chapter, the plants, and made notes from what she said, and then kind of distilled all of that into the lyrics. Uh, yeah, as I said, I was keen not to lift anything she said, because were her special words.
Yeah.
And so I think there's only a couple of lines in all of the songs that I wrote which feature a snippet of something from what she said. So there's 12 chapters, there's 12 songs, and two of those songs are poems of hers that I've put to music, but the rest is all written for this project.
And the project itself is not just the album. You've got a series of podcasts which have gone along with it, and you're hoping to tour it as well. We'll talk a bit about the podcast, because I've really enjoyed listening to them. There was such a mixture of people. You've had some people who have direct links with Nan Shepherd, like biographer and executor, but you've also interviewed other artists who I think that perhaps you've collaborated with as well.
Yeah, so it was kind of inspired. I first of all, I love listening to podcasts. I'm much more of a podcast listener than a reader, and audiobooks in general. I like being able to do things whilst I'm listening and taking that in, and so I was kind of, I liked the idea of doing a podcast for a while, and then through this project got to meet lots of really interesting people from a broad spectrum of different jobs, and as you were saying, some people who knew Nan Shepherd, some people who studied and researched her. So the podcasts include artists who are inspired by the mountains and Nan Shepherd's book itself, writers who very much the same, and ecologists as well, so people working within the Cairngorms or near to the Cairngorms. And so it was just a lovely excuse really to sit down and have a good blether with these folk, and a lot of them I was chatting with anyway, but to actually record the snapshot of that conversation, and it was really a lovely thing to do, and just for my own interest I started doing it. But there's been some really good feedback from people enjoying them, I think, because it does draw on lots of different people. So it's not just looking at creativity in response to the Cairngorms, it's everything. So yeah, it's been a good fun process.
I think that's one of the great things that podcasts do, is it does give you an excuse to have a really nice kind
Yeah.
of chat with someone, and that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And you've also got a guitar maker on there as well, which I was interested by.
Yes, so Rory Dowling, who's a really good friend of mine, I grew up just over the hill from where he grew up, and our families are really good friends. So we spent a lot of time together when we were kids, and he has set up a guitar making business that he's been doing for a good number of years now. Over 10 years, I think. And he makes beautiful, beautiful guitars. So they sound amazing and they look amazing, and they're often bespoke. Well, they're all pretty much
Yeah.
bespoke to the player. And I was quite keen to have a really nice instrument on the recording. And my other guitars, I think one of them is from China, and the other one is from the States, and I just thought it would be so nice to have something that's actually made in Scotland. And so I contacted him and said, any chance I could borrow one of your guitars for the recording? And I told him a bit about the project, and he said, do you know what, I'll do one better. I'll make a guitar for
Wow.
the project. And then it was a process of, having some chats with him and deciding the sort of sounds and the ethos and the whole idea behind this guitar. And he put a call out to some friends, which included Andrew, who supplied this amazing piece of wood which makes the body of the guitar. It's a old bar shelf from the Fife Arms in Braemar,
Fantastic.
and the rest of it's all reclaimed wood from Scotland that's been part of an Anstruther pier. It's some part of a banister, and it's all wood that's been in Scotland from Scotland.
That podcast in particular and the whole undertaking almost seemed to get to the heart of the Living Mountain. It's not just about making the music, but it's about the instrument and the creation of the instrument itself and all of that thing, because it's in the Living Mountain. The point is made, at least in my copy at the beginning, there's a lot of people go to mountains to get to the top, whereas what Nan Shepherd is doing is, it's about the whole thing. It's not about getting to the top or even getting to the top. It's about being there. And it's the same, I think, with the idea that, well, we're going to create this guitar from the wood that's around us, and that's going to go towards the music that's made. It all just seems to link in like a lot of the things do in the book itself.
Yeah, I think it felt like the right thing, and it's such a beautiful thing to play and a lovely sound, and he's such a craftsman that to create something that is so much the Cairngorms, and that he reckons it's possibly the only guitar to be made out of Scots pine, and it's this bar shelf, that's still got on the inside of the guitar, he's left it as it was, the original bar shelf. So the rest of it's lovely and polished and cleaned up, but on the inside you can still see the ring marks from the whiskey bottles or from the wine bottles that had sat on it for hundreds of years, like 100 years at least. So it's a lot of character.
It's so fantastic. And the idea of the stories that would have been, whispered in and around that bar shelf, it's terrific.
Yeah.
And you're also hoping to take the Living Mountain out on tour, and it is talking about collaboration. There's an audio visual collaboration going on. Can you explain a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so basically from early on in the project, a bit similarly to the guitar and thinking it needs to have something, that special element, it's got to just be so Cairngorm centric. Early on I thought, you can't really do the Cairngorms justice just through sound. You kind of need to have the visual element as well. And I'd been working on a project with Inga Thompson called Northern Flyway, which is an audiovisual project, and there's loads of imagery of birds. That's what the project's inspired by. And it was so much fun to be involved, to do that, to have this projection going on while we were playing the music, but also to be inspired by that and to kind of you're bouncing ideas off. The film is inspired in part by the music, and the music is inspired in part by the film. So it's a real sort of symbiosis of the two, and it really is an immersive experience. And that's how I see the book, The Living Mountain. It's quite an immersive experience, this idea of being in a place, like really being there, not just physically but mentally, and wanted to portray that in the gig. So to have the visuals as well as the music, it really adds to the overall experience. I think you can kind of get lost in it for an hour or however long.
But there is a kind of meditative, if that's the right word, aspect to the album as well, because I've been listening to the album. It's a beautiful thing, and you can just lose yourself in it, as I think you can with Nan Shepherd's book as well. You said you can go in at any point and you'll find a beautiful phrase, or it's a very sensual book in the way that it kind of, she describes all her senses, and maybe even a sixth sense at times, getting stimulated by being on the mountain. Was that something that you felt you wanted to recreate or even just create?
Yeah, I hoped to, and I think hopefully I have in part at least managed to do that. I think by incorporating, again early on, decided that I needed to incorporate some of the sounds from the Cairngorms. Very, very keen to record field samples within the Cairngorms itself, and we pull out the volume of it a little bit every now and again, so you can really hear a certain bird call or something. But otherwise, it's just absolutely unedited, and it's the sounds of the Cairngorms or that specific point in the Cairngorms. And there's other field samples as well that feature some that I made myself, and some from a couple of sound field recorders. One person who's Jez Riley French, who recorded some incredible sounds of trees creaking in the wind and also people walking in snow, and then some beautiful sounds of birds and red deer, which features in the birds, animals, and insects track, and that was by Magnus Robb. So I think that all kind of hopefully adds to the overall experience of listening. I think you every now and again you tune into, oh, I didn't notice that little bird in there before, or that the trickling burn over here, or
It's a lovely thing because you realize as well that it will never be, you could never recapture that perfectly. It's going to be
yeah,
different every single time.
yeah,
And I think, again, going back to the book, it's something that Nan Shepherd talks about. The kind of experiences on the mountain will be different every single time. At one
yeah,
point, I think she talks about seeing a light that she's never seen before and perhaps never will again. And I guess
yeah,
that is kind of what music is like, or a lot of the time, particularly playing live, I guess, is that it will be different every time.
yeah, yeah. And I'm quite looking forward. I think that's the nice thing, that as well, realizing from doing Northern Flyway, that an audience member could come every single night and get something different out of it, but depending on where you're sat in the audience,
Yeah,
your view, the angle of your view, and obviously the music changes naturally. It has like um, a rhythm to it that can change around a bit. Like it's almost like the breathing space of it that will change each night of a gig, and so that'll be really interesting to, when we do finally hopefully get to go on tour with it, to see how it develops in that setting as well, because we were meant to be on tour this year, in May, and then again around now actually, but that's obviously been postponed until next year. So it'll be good to get out on the road with that.
no, I think there are so many people waiting to kind of engage with live music again. It's going to be some time when people are allowed out to it, the
Yeah,
gigs will be absolutely jumping.
yeah,
Um, Going back to some of the themes in the book, there's a kind of spiritual element to it as well, as you say. Almost, it's not almost a Buddhist element because Buddhism is actually referenced at the kind of at the end, I think. And I find that really interesting. And I know it was something that interested quite a few Scottish writers at that time. I think Neil Gunn was another one
yeah.
who I believe she was in correspondence with.
Hmm.
And there's sections in it that remind me of parts of Sunset Song,
Hmm.
where they talk about the land and and really it is about the relationship between the individual and the land. Is that how you kind of view it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I wonder if the sort of philosophical, it's almost like a religious element in
Yeah,
a way, that kind of the love of the hills, and that idea of being in a place. I wonder if that's in part because of everything that was going on in sort of normal life. You know, there was the war that was raging at the
yeah.
time, and so there was some kind of escapism, although I'd be a bit, yeah, I don't know whether that's the right word, but there's some kind of like solace in going into the mountains and having that breathing space, and therefore it maybe would have did get a bit philosophical because of that reason. I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but it sounds
I think
great.
that's a really interesting point because when I was reading the book again the first time in a while, I thought of the phenomenon I'd seen recently after the first very strict lockdown had eased, and the amount
Mm,
of people I knew, particularly in the Central Belt, who suddenly were posting pictures of them at the top of mountains or at the
yeah,
side of lochs, or they were really getting back to nature. And it was a lot of people I never expect to
yeah,
do that. It did seem to me that there's an idea of it's not just enough to get out the house, we have to kind of
yeah.
get out properly.
And it maybe changes the way that we view a thing as well. Like what's important is that freedom, being able to go out. You kind of, you've taken it for, everybody's taken it for granted for forever, that they can just go out of their house whenever they want and go and travel wherever they want to. Particularly in Scotland, we're very lucky in that way, but all of a sudden having these restrictions put on movement, and you do think, even though maybe you've not been to the hills for 5 years, oh, actually, I really want to go there.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the amount of times people, and I include myself in this, say, oh, that's part of somewhere I'd really like to go, but I just haven't been yet. And then suddenly it's like, well, you know, better get going before too long. And I think that's maybe what people did. So to link that back to, I mean, they're not really comparable, but as you say, a time that was horrific, genuinely horrific, this idea of maybe escape and just experiencing nature, which is what
Yeah.
Shepherd does. Um,
Mhm.
if once you read the book, and I hope many people will, you never kind of think about your surroundings again in the same way. I don't think. I think you listen and you taste, even like a drink of water from a running stream. You know,
Yeah.
things that you maybe wouldn't think of doing, or the noises of the different animals, as you say, the deer, and it really does encourage you to kind of be a part of your surroundings, no matter where those surroundings are. I think you could, even if you live in a city, you could take that on board.
I think there's something quite humbling about it as well. And again, I don't want to necessarily draw a comparison between Nan Shepherd going up to the mountains during the war and us in
No,
COVID
no,
times,
no,
but
no.
there's something quite humbling in the fact that the landscape is the same or changes very little over a huge geological time, and we're only here for a fleeting moment. And being in the landscape, again, like you say, whether that's walking through a park in a city or being able to get up a hill or going to the beach, you know, like where I live here, there's something quite real about that.
No, no.
And not influenced necessarily by humans, although obviously there's elements that are, but there's
Yeah.
something
Um,
nice about that.
the because talking about being real and being an honest book, and it is, and she doesn't shy away from the fact that the mountain can be a very dangerous and sometimes deadly place. I mean, there are
Yeah.
examples of that in it. Kind of nature red in tooth and claw often is
Yeah.
the way of it. So I just think it's you know, I could talk about the book for a long, long time, but it is just such an interesting piece of literature in terms of Scottish literature, because it isn't like a lot of other things at the time. You know, a lot
No.
of the rural stuff was looked at as the stories of the people who lived there rather
Yeah.
than the there itself. And I mean, you obviously lived in the area, but now you don't live in the area. So have you kind of taken the lessons from the book with you? Does it travel with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one thing about the book. It's that although it's about the Cairngorms, you don't have to have ever been to the Cairngorms or experienced any landscape like it to get a lot out of it. Obviously, she mentions lots of place names to do with that region, but the sort of philosophy of it and the ideas of just getting out and, like you're saying, tasting the stream water or going out and experiencing things in a different way. I think that's applicable across any landscape, and that's hearing things in a new way, walking in a different way. I think before having really got into the book, I would go hill walking with a purpose, and
Yes.
that would be okay, let's go and walk these 3 Munros, or let's do this circular walk on this day, and you'd plan it out before, and just you'd go and do that, and you'd be on a mission, and you'd be like, okay, well, it says it's going to take 6 hours, so let's try and do it in 5.5 or whatever. But now it's a case of, okay, we've got the map and the compass and all the safety stuff still, but let's just go for a wander, and that looks interesting up there, let's go for a walk up there. And I think that's really changed the way that I experience the outdoors. And otherwise, I think if I hadn't read that book, I'd probably still be walking in the old way.
Well, it did exactly the same to me. I'm a keen hill walker, and I go down to the Lake District quite a lot. And I was the same. It was like, right, Helvellyn tick, Scafell tick, you know, and you're doing all of that. And then after reading this book, I would just go where I thought was interesting, and
Yeah.
instead of going up hills, kind of go round the lakes
Yeah.
instead, or just find these different ways of doing it. And one, it's a lot quieter, but
Yeah.
also you just, it's about experiencing it and not kind of missing the experience because you're in such a race to get to the very top.
I think you experience it in a totally different way as well. Like, you're like, oh, I'm interested, yeah, interested to see what's down there, and then you might stumble across an interesting moth or a cool plant, or and you can stop and watch that for a while and have a snooze on the side of a hill, and you can, it's a bit more, it feels more like this flexibility in it, I think.
So we talked a little bit about your collaborations. You mentioned Northern Flyway, and you're also a member of Salthouse. How are they? Are they ongoing, or what else have you got coming up?
Yeah, so all of that's ongoing. We were meant to be on tour. It was due to be one of the busiest years I think I've had in music this year, but Northern Flyway was meant to have a couple of tours this year. Those have been postponed till next year, and similarly with Salthouse, we should have been in Germany just last week, and various different tours. But yeah, we're trying to keep things going, and there'll hopefully be an EP out with Salthouse at some point in the next 6 months. So we've been working on music remotely, which has been an interesting new process for us. But it's really good. It's just nice to have a goal and get to play music again. It's different. Obviously, I'm not in person with the other folk in the band, but it's lovely batting ideas backward and forwards, and my recording skills are getting better.
And I mean, that's how you have been doing it. You've been continued to make music, but just having to find new ways of approaching it.
Yeah, I think at first felt quite resistant to it because it was just an unknown amount of time, and there's still an unknown amount of time until we're going to get to go back to work. But I found that quite difficult. And so instead channeled my energy into digging the garden, which proved fruitful. Not Sorry for the pun, but no, it was good.
And is it quite nice to move between your solo project? Well, I guess no, but you are collaborating on your solo project as well. But in terms of the music, it's you doing everything. Are you playing everything? Have you done on
with
the solo?
solos?
Yeah.
So for the Living Mountain, I wrote all the songs or adapted her 2 poems, and then kind of went for the recording. We went up to Clashnetti Arts Centre. Me and Andy Bell, who produced the record, we went up for a week, and I played everything, and then so various different instruments. Andy played, managed to persuade him to do some percussion and a little bit of singing, but I put down various instruments, guitar and piano and dulcimer and things, and then we had a couple of days working with the other musicians who feature on the record, who added their parts on afterwards, and that was lovely to hear those songs kind of take on another element and another level, really, with their parts. And it was really keen for them to put their own stamp on it as well. So I also can't write music, so I couldn't tell them what to do anyway or give them sheet music, but just sort of said maybe something that comes in halfway through, or whatever you feel like, just do what feels right. And they did, and it was just lovely to hear that.
And I'm interested, how do you decide with a project like this, which is, if you take the source material, it's all about how things are developing constantly and shifting. How do you decide that's it, that's been ticked off and that this album is now finished? Is it down to deadlines and things like that, or
I think it's when it gets to a point where you're satisfied with that it's as good as it can be for now. You record it, and I think it was Johnny Hardy who I work with, and he said, a recording's only ever a snapshot of it in time, and you're recording a version of it, but obviously then you go and tour it more, or you play that music with other people, and it evolves and changes over time. So the recording is a snapshot, but that music will probably continue to evolve.
And having done the whole project now, because we should say the album is out on the 16th, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So by the time people hear this, it will be out and available to buy. Yeah. And with doing the podcast and such a kind of big project, has it made you think about the book in a different way? Have you?
I haven't, to be honest, I've not really thought about that. So I always thought how the book has influenced,
Yeah,
I haven't gone back and actually reread the book since the music has been sort of finalized.
yeah.
It'd be interesting to reread it and see if if my association with that book has changed as a result of the project.
Well, it's a beautiful album, I have to say, and the project as a whole. If you've enjoyed what we've been talking about for the last half hour or so, then you should listen to the podcasts and check everything out, and also read
Read
Nan
the book.
Shepherd, fantastic, The Living Mountain, because I genuinely think it could change your life. It's one of those books that does
Yeah,
that.
yeah, definitely. And for something that's that small, it's quite remarkable that it could have that impact. But
Yeah, it packs so much in. I think often with when you get this in poetry, obviously, but I think often with short fiction, you do get that sense of every word counting,
yes, yeah.
everything, none of it's wasted, and there is no
Mm.
waste in the Living Mountain at all. And yeah, when next time you go for a walk after reading it, you'll be changed, no doubt.
Yeah. It's quite. I don't know if you've ever taken the book with you on a walk and dipped in, like had a read of it while you're out in the hill. But that's quite nice thing to do.
Oh no, I haven't. Oh, that's a great idea. There's a quote that Nan Shepherd says, which kind of gets the heart, pun, I suppose, intended, of the book, is that she talks about the mountain having it inside, and kind of
Mm.
almost like a living, breathing thing. And for me, it's about how, in some smaller way, we change the mountain, but also in a much larger way, how the mountain changes
Yeah.
us just by kind of being on it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, fantastic. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's
Oh,
been an absolute pleasure.
yeah, it's been lovely. Nice to have a chat about it. So thank you.
Oh, no problem at all. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.